Well, I'm usually a fairly loud speaker, so I was just gonna shout if that's okay with you. And I also tend to be a rather casual speaker. I love audience participation. So my name is Kristel. I am a pharmacist. I have done practice in many different areas of pharmacy. Where I'm at currently right now is with Samaritan Health Plans. Before I was with Samaritan Health Plans, I spent almost 7 years on an inpatient mental health unit, and that is actually my specialty. I'm a board-certified psychopharmacology person. What that really means is I'm a big, huge chemistry nerd. Unfortunately, I hate to admit that, but are there any other chemistry nerds? Oh, come on, don't make me the only one. Seriously, it's Corvallis, the college is here. Well, the reason I bring that up is because calcium is on the periodic table of elements. And a lot of the information that we've heard here today, I'm just going to reiterate that. And I'm going to hit the points that as a pharmacist and as chemistry thinking, I think are the most important points. First of all, we did hear already that 99% of the calcium in our bodies is in bones and teeth. And then we have this small amount in our blood. But other than bones and teeth, what is the most important role for calcium? Secondary. Does anybody have an idea? It's very important. Without it, you would die. It has to do with the regulation of your heart rhythm. So most people don't realize that. When you actually look at, and unfortunately I've looked at lots of graphs. Remember, I'm a chemistry nerd. But if you look at the graph of the heart rhythm, it's actually a calcium peak and down. So that's why you probably don't want to get too much calcium. Now, it's hard to get too much. It really is. You have to work at it. And, but it is possible. And we've heard others say here before about getting too much. It's not that we're concerned you're going to get too much and make your bones brittle, which can happen, but again, you have to be really dedicated. It's that you might cause an arrhythmia on your heart. So that's really the big issue there. So here's my proof that I'm a chemistry nerd. And it basically, this is all the main forms of supplements. Now, calcium is the most abundant substance in the body. And then when you come along with carbon, which is the most abundant basically in the earth, and you combine the two and you get lots of different forms. Now, if you take your house cleaner or your paint thinner and you turn it over, you'll see forms of calcium on there. You'll see the name. Don't worry, that's not in your vitamin or your calcium supplement. But there are many, many forms, and it can get confusing. The actual element calcium is what we see on the periodic table. Then we combine that with other things to make a supplement. The most common is calcium carbonate. That's what you see in your oyster shell calcium supplements. That's what you have in Tums. Now, 500 milligrams of calcium is in, calcium carbonate, I should say, is in each chewable tablet of Tums. It doesn't have to be the Tums brand name. It can be the Bimart brand or whatever like that. But that is actually a good source of calcium. So calcium gluconate, that's another supplement that you will sometimes see at the store. Not as often, but again, remember how I mentioned heart rhythm? If you were in the hospital and having some sort of major arrhythmia, or God forbid you're like in the movies, having a code 99 arrest, we might give you an IV push of calcium gluconate to turn that around. You had a quick question? Well, she's asking about Tums and the supplement of Tums, and whether or not they're good for you. I'll get to that, okay? And we'll kind of talk about that. So calcium citrate. This is another over-the-counter form of calcium supplement. It's also used as a food preservative or an additive, but you may have heard of Citracal. That is a calcium supplement. And then you have calcium acetate. This is actually prescription. And the reason it's prescription is because the purpose is not to protect your bones and get higher calcium, it's to bind phosphate. because if you happen to be in kidney failure or your kidneys are just not running at their top performance, usually it has to be pretty bad, like if you're on dialysis or close to dialysis stage. One of the things that your kidneys do is filter out phosphate. And again, that gets to the whole electrical conduction of your muscles and your heart, and you don't want too much of that. So calcium acetate is given to people in kidney failure to bind up that phosphate so you can excrete it out the other end rather than through your kidney. So my cartoon is small on this. I tried to make it big for you guys. Basically, it's a caveman calcium cartoon here that says, "Honey, I picked up a fresh rock of calcium for dinner tonight." And really what I want to get a point here is that calcium is essential to maintain homeostasis, which is a fancy way of saying being able to live in a regular state or normal state, if you want to think about it that way. Long-term calcium deficiency can lead to a lot of issues. You all may have heard or even known somebody, depending on where you're from and how old you are, rickets. That's the disease that you get when you don't get enough calcium when you're young. And it leads to soft, spongy bone. And then what happens is usually the bone gets malformed. So that's the whole idea of being bow-legged, possibly. Rickets, we don't see very much here in the United States anymore. And that's not because we're great at eating so much calcium and taking calcium supplements, but a lot of that is because our food is fortified with calcium. It's also fortified with vitamin D. So you get a lot of extra calcium without necessarily knowing it. It doesn't come naturally in that food. Now, our dietitians here talked about some natural sources, which are great, but recognize that there are lots of things that the government fortifies with extra calcium. But you go anywhere outside the United States and some third world countries, rickets is alive and well. And that is definitely one of the leading issues that can happen if you do not get the calcium necessary early in life. And Dr. E talked about that, about in your 20s and even in your childhood, making sure that you get the right amount of calcium. So this is the who, what, and why. We talked about male versus females. You hear calcium as an issue, or more important, when you think of females. And that's just because females go through this wonderful change in life called menopause. And I'm not quite there yet. I'm in denial about that right now. But I'm sure I'll be there soon. But when the female body goes through that transition and that hormonal change, we lose the extra ability that we naturally have to keep calcium. And it doesn't, so that's why you hear about it mostly with women. But it affects men too. And I think that people forget that. It can, especially once you get older, you get to 70, 75, you men are not getting a free pass. It will catch up with you. It just tends to happen to women a little bit earlier. So what calcium supplement should you take? This is controversial because I tend to meet people who are very passionate about one form or another. And they want to preach about, oh, but it's got to be this, and it's got to be this brand, this kind, and you know what? I don't care. The best calcium is out there is the one that you'll take every day. That's really the truth. There are people that say the calcium citrate is better absorbed, so you want to do calcium citrate. Well, studies have shown that actually the absorption of the two between calcium carbonate and calcium citrate really aren't that different. What matters is how you take it. And then the amount that you take. So I am not particularly passionate about one form or another. If you can get enough calcium from your food, that's great. If you don't want to eat a tub of turnip greens and a couple cans of sardines for breakfast, then a supplement is probably a good idea. So why? Why do we care? Well, we care, first of all, because calcium is necessary for life. We're here talking about bone health, but remember, you can't live without it. It is something that your body has to have. We're just fortunate that most of the time we have it in our foods that we eat, or even if you take a vitamin, but it is possible to get too low amount of calcium. It is possible to have low amounts, and not only will you have bone issues, but you could have some other health consequences. I like this particular statement here from the National Osteoperosis Foundation. It says, calcium plays an important role in building stronger, denser bones earlier in life, and then keeping bones strong and healthier later in life. Notice the first part, the earlier, is probably the most important. If you're like me, you tend to wait for a while until you start thinking, yeah, I'm getting close to menopause, I might be getting older, I better start taking vitamins. Well, you really should do it before you get to that point. So here's the important how. And our dietitians and our nutritionists mentioned this, and I think this is really the most important. Your body cannot absorb large doses of calcium. It can't. It's a very, I think of it as a very big, large, bulky compound. And it is. They were saying earlier about how if you had it in your vitamin, your pill would be like so big. I mean, you can't swallow it because it's a large, bulky impound. That means that you also have issues absorbing it. It's hard for your body to take up. So to get the most bang for your buck, it's 500 milligrams at a time. That's where the idea of TUMS, or an antacid, plays in, a calcium carbonate antacid. Those are cheap and they're easy. Now, there are lots of other antacids out there that are made with magnesium or other types of elements. You want to make sure you're getting a calcium carbonate antacid. That's why I mentioned TUMS. But those tablets are 500 milligrams each. And so it's easy to just pop one and chew it up. You're done. And you know you've gotten the right amount for that time. If you have one of those great big bottles at home that's the 1,500, 1,200, go ahead and continue to take them. They're not going to hurt you. They're not bad for you. But you're literally going to be getting rid of that extra 500 to 600 milligrams literally down the drain because your body just doesn't absorb it. It can't. So it's important that you split those doses up. And that means if you're going to take, if your doctor has told you to take 1,500 milligrams, that's 3 times a day. And it's hard to take something 3 times a day. It's easier to just take one big thing and get it over with. But unfortunately, your body's not going to absorb it that way. So calcium in medications. Do you ever see the labels on your medications that say do not take with a vitamin or antacids or sometimes a mineral supplement? Well, it's really not because you're inhibiting the calcium from absorbing. It's because the calcium is inhibiting whatever medication you're taking to absorb. Again, it's a huge, bulky molecule. It likes to grab on to other stuff. So the big one is antibiotics. And the rule of thumb is that you separate it by either an hour before or 2 hours after. Now, if you forget and you take your antibiotic because maybe you've got like an infection, UTI or something, a bladder infection, and you take your vitamins and you do your antibiotic, you're not going to turn into a pumpkin. There's no reason to call the doctor or anything like that. It just means you're not getting as much of that antibiotic as you should be. And if you have a serious infection, that's important. Or maybe your infection isn't serious yet. So please keep that part in mind. Some medications can also affect your calcium levels, your hormones, We talked about thyroid, estrogen. We also mentioned diuretics or water pills, and a few blood pressure medications. Those are the opposite. Those are ones that affect your blood level of calcium, not the calcium inside your bones. It doesn't go in your bone and yank it out, but it affects your blood level. So should you take a calcium supplement? That's really the question. And you know, I hate to do the cop-out, talk to your doctor. But calcium is important and not without some potential for risk. So you should talk to your doctor. I would say there's a good 90-some% chance that everybody here is fine without it. I mean, or with just taking it. But I don't know your specific conditions. I don't know specific medications you're on. And there are other medications, if you have osteoporosis, that are prescription that you may need to take along with calcium or in place of calcium for your specific condition. The last thing I want to mention, and I didn't include a slide, but it's been brought up multiple times, and that's vitamin D. And Dr. E mentioned in the very beginning about in the Northwest you need to take vitamin D. And then our dietitians mentioned something. I don't know if you caught it. Why do we have to take vitamin D here in the Northwest? Yep, it has to do with where we are on the globe. I don't know if you passed the little sign right outside of Salem that says you're at the 45th parallel. So it's because of where the sunlight hits on the globe. You could sit, and then anything you do that somehow affects your ability to absorb sunlight also interferes, like sunscreen, if you happen to wear clothes. All of those things actually inhibit your ability to absorb sunlight. Here in Oregon, you could sit out buck naked all day long and still end up with some vitamin D deficiency. Vitamin D does help with that absorption. The other thing about vitamin D, again, chemistry, getting back to the chemistry piece, is it's really kind of complicated. It doesn't come naturally in a lot of foods. I mean, there's some, but not a lot. Most of it comes from sun, and it's complicated. So what happens is it hits your skin. It's changed chemically at that point. Then it goes to your liver. It's changed chemically again. Then it goes to your kidney. It's changed chemically again. And then at that point, it can absorb for bone. So if you have anything wrong at that point, you're wearing clothes, your liver maybe is not running at full capacity, your kidneys are slightly damaged, you're going to be vitamin D deficient. So it does matter what kind of vitamin D you take, and that is definitely the kind of thing you should talk with your doctor about. So I hope you all enjoyed everything. We're glad you're all here. I'll hang out after lunch for questions.